During this section, we're going to take a look at working with a list, but we're going to talk about working with list functions. How can we create more dynamic type functions to help us calculate data inside of a list, or what Excel will refer to as a table or a database. Now open in front of you, I've got the example file that we've been working with, Excel 102 exercises, and I'm currently on the list functions tab. Now what I'm going to do here is I want to create a calculation that will sum up the total expense column, but I only want to sum up the total expense column where the category equals supplies. So now we know how to work with the sum functions. It's the most common function that people use inside of Excel. I just want to sum up a range of cells. Well, great. We got a function to do that. It's called sum. But in this case, I don't want to sum up all of total expenses. I just want to sum it up where category equals supplies. Now, in order for me to do this, if I were to use the sum function, just plain old sum, I'd have to manipulate my list in some way. I'd have to filter for supplies, so I only get supplies, or maybe I'd have to sort for supplies and insert a row and calculate just for supplies. You know, there's some additional steps that I would have to do to first find the values for supplies. Well, in steps the dsum function, or the database sum function. With this one, this is how it's different from the regular sum. This will allow you to add a condition to your summing. Take a look. This is how it works. So my first step, I've identified that I want to sum up the total expenses by a category called supplies. So the first thing I need to do is someplace out here is I need to create a condition or my criteria. So I'm going to say I want Excel to look at the category column and I want it to look for supplies, right? Now I've done two things here. I put in a header that's telling Excel that, hey, when you go to sum up the total expenses, you should be looking for a column called category. And when you find the column called category, look for supplies underneath that column. Now I'm going to format the header there just so I identify it as the header. Let's just do something simple here. There we go. Now I'm going to come over here and say this is going to be my total expense. Okay. And let's format that one as well. I'm going to use my format painter here, a little paintbrush. There we go. All right, and let's make that column wider. Yay, there we go. All right, so now I've got some headers over there to help assist me with creating this calculation. So now my next step, I'm inside of I4, and here's where I'm going to create the calculation. So now I'm going to go up to my Formulas tab. I could go looking through the books, right, trying to find the function here. If we're not sure which book to look into, we can go to Insert function. This will open up a search window, and I'm just going to type in D, remember this stands for database, sum, and I'll hit go. So there's my dsum function. And down below it tells me, hey, this function adds the numbers in the field column of records in the database that match the conditions you specify. So we want to sum up the total expense column where our condition is category equals supplies. I'm going to hit OK. And now I get to fill in the specifics about the dsum function. So first step, wants to know where my database is at, where my list is at, so it knows where all my data is at. So my list starts up inside of A1. Now I'm going to use a shortcut key here to select the rest of my list. I'm going to do Control-Shift down arrow. That grabs all the way down to the bottom. I can see I go down to row number 59. And then I'm going to do Control-Shift right arrow. And I go all the way over to the F column. So my list is from A1 to F59. There's my list, Excel. That's where you're going to find my data. Now the next thing is the field. Well, what's the field? The field is either the label of the column in double quotation marks or a number that represents the column's position in the list. Well, that still didn't help me a whole lot. The field is which column do you actually want to sum up? So for me, it could be one of a couple things. It could be total expenses in quotation marks. It could be number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I could put the number 6 in there. Or I can just go select F1. Either way, all three methods work. The last thing. So I've told it where my list is at, which column do I want to sum up, but now I want to do a condition. Remember, I don't want to sum up every record. I only want to sum up where the category equals supplies. So all I need to do here is for my criteria is I'm going to select these two values. What is that? H3 through H4, where the category equals supplies. And that's it. Where's your list? Which column do you want to sum up? And what's your criteria? Criteria needs a header so that it knows to look for category in the list, and it needs the criteria, what it is searching for inside that column. I'll hit OK, and I'm done. $25,275 for total expenses for supplies. Now let's make a change here. You know what? I don't want supplies. I want software. And I'll hit my enter key. $17,215 for software. Simple. It's not a regular sum function anymore. You can now add conditions to your summing. I want to sum up this column if this is true. So try this out. Open up the exercise file, jump over to List Functions tab, and get the total expenses for a specific category using the dsum function. So dsum is just one database function. There's actually a handful of them that you can use, and they're very similar to some of the more standard type of functions that you use inside of Excel. We just saw dsum, previous lecture. Now let's take a look at another very common function, but we're going to add the D to it, the database, which gives us the ability to add a condition. We're going to take a look at a function here called daverage. And if you took part in the previous lecture where we talked about dsum, it's practically identical. The only difference is you're not summing, you're averaging. So take a look. I've created a little placeholder information here for me to perform this calculation. But now I want to get the average expense. Remember, total expenses here. I want to get the average expense for the category of rent. So I'm going to click over here to I8, and I'm going to create this calculation. So once again, back to formulas, back into insert function, and I want to find the daverage. Let's spell that the right way. Daverage, I'll hit go. There's my daverage. So this is going to average the values in a column, in a list or database that matches the conditions you specify. Just like dsum, but we're now averaging. So I'll hit OK. This is exactly the same as the dsum. First thing, database. Okay, I'm going to go grab my entire database, which was from A1, Control-Shift down arrow, Control-Shift right arrow, to F59. I've now grabbed my entire list. Remember, Control-Shift in your arrow keys. Well, field, remember this one? This is which column or field do you want to actually average? In my case, I'll grab F1. And my criteria. Well, I don't want to average all of total expenses. I only want to average where category equals rent. So I'll grab my header there and the condition, H7 through H8. And that's it. I'll hit OK. And I've now got the average rent, total expense rent, throughout my entire list. Let's try changing it. Let's go from rent to copying. I'll hit my enter key. $11,630 for average expense for copying throughout all my different divisions within this list. So just like the dsum, the only difference is we're not summing, we're now averaging. So once again, try this out. You get some practice in there. You nail down one of these, you're going to know how to work with all of them. And in the next lecture, we're going to take a look at one more database function. So here's the next and the final one that we're going to take a look at, D function. This is called dcount. So this one will allow us to count a specific set of records based on a condition. Now there are many different types of count functions. You got just plain old count, you got count blanks, you got count A, you got count if. This is the dcount function. Take a look. And if you watch the previous two lectures on dsum and daverage, you're going to feel right at home on this one because it is exactly the same. Once again, the only difference is we're not summing, we're not averaging, we're now counting. All right, so I'm going to jump into my I10 cell here, and I've just created some placeholders for me to use here. Got a category for supplies, and I now want to get a total count for how many records are related to supplies for category. All right, I'm inside of I10, back to formulas, insert function, and I'll find the dcount function. We'll go. All right. Counts the cells containing numbers in the field column of records in the database that match the conditions you specify. So this is going to count numbers. I'll hit OK. All right. Just like before, database, first step, A1 down to F59. Remember, control shift down arrow, control shift right arrow, select your data. My field, well, what is it that I want to count? Remember, what is the D count function count? Can I count the division or categories? Nope. The D count function counts numbers. So I'm going to tell it to, once again, count the total expenses because that's a numeric column. My criteria. Well, once again, I don't want to count all the total expenses. I only want to count where the category is supplies. So I'll use my header and my criteria section right here. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And I've got 4. 4 of these records match supplies. And I think they might be all the same. Let's try changing this to advertising. Make sure I spell that right. 4 once again. Let's try another one. Let's try rent. 4 once again. I think they all have 4 in there. But we're now able to dynamically count a group of records based on a condition. So we got 3 of them there. dsum, daverage, dcount. Jump into your formulas and insert function and see if you can find any other D functions, because I bet you will. But try this one out first. Jump into the exercise file, go to list functions, and count the number of records that contain some category, whether it's supplies or rent or software or overhead, whatever it is. Your magic number when it gets back to you should be 4. We're going to take a look at one more list function that's found inside of Microsoft Excel. We actually saw this one in kind of a roundabout way in an earlier lecture during this course when we were talking about subtotals. We didn't drill down into it, but the subtotal feature utilizes a function to create the calculations called subtotal. So we're going to take a look at the pros, the big advantages that you get here, utilizing the subtotal function within Excel. Take a look. So once again, I've got the exercise file open and I'm still working with the list functions worksheet where we were playing around with the daverage, dsum, and dcount functions. Now I want to sum up the total expense column here, but this list can potentially be filtered. Take a look. I'm going to jump up here to the H column and I'm going to do a simple sum function here, just utilizing regular old sum. Okay, that we all know and love and you probably use time and time again. Now, what do I want to sum up? I want to sum up the total expenses. So this is going to be from F2, I'm going to do Control Shift down arrow, to F59. I'll hit my Enter key, and I've got, ooh, what is that? That's a huge number. So $1,428,320.00. All right, now that's using a standard sum function. Okay? Now, what if I now filter this list? What would happen to that number? Well, we're going to find out here in a moment. Now, I'm going to jump over to the I column, and I'm going to create a very similar function here. I want to sum up that range of cells, but rather than using the standard sum function, I'm going to use the subtotal function, and I'm going to tell it the type of subtotal that I want is a sum. Watch this. So I'm inside of I1. I'll go up to my Formulas tab. I'm going to go to Insert Function, and I'm going to find the subtotal function. I'll type subtotal in. I'm going to hit Go. There's subtotal. So returns a subtotal in a list or a database. Okay, that's not very descriptive, but great. All right. I'm going to hit OK. So now the first thing it wants to know is the function number. For a subtotal, it needs to know, well, what type of subtotal do you want to perform here? Do you want to do a sum, an average, a count, a min, or a maximum? What type of subtotal do you want? Well, it tells me down below that function number is a number 1 to 11 that specifies a summary function for the subtotal. Okay, great. So I got 11 different subtotal functions that I can perform here. Well, what does 1 mean? What does 2 mean? What is 3? And so on. What's 11? How do I get to a sum function? Well, in order to find out what 1 to 11, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 mean, I'm going to click on the link down here that says help on this function. So this will take just a moment to launch, but this is going to bring up my help window, and it brought up help on the subtotal function. This is great. I'm going to scroll down, and I can see that a 1 would be average, 2 would be count, and so on. I want a sum. So I'm going to find number 9 is a sum. So I'll close my help window. I'm going to type in the number 9, which means sum. Now the next thing, they're calling it ref1 or reference 1. I need to tell it the range of cells that I actually want to subtotal. In this case, that I want to sum up. So for me, my reference 1, I'm going to grab F2, Control Shift down arrow to F59. That's the range of cells that I want to create a subtotal for that I want to sum up. I'll hit OK. All right. Exact duplicates, $1,428,320. Exactly the same over here for subtotal. I'm performing a subtotal, but I'm summing within that subtotal. What's the difference? I mean, they gave me the exact same results. Well, take a look. I'm going to go back to my list. I'm going to filter this list now. So remember this? I'll click into my list. Doesn't matter where. I'll go to data. I'll turn on my filter button. Now I get those little drop downs. Remember talking about those in the first section? I'm going to say, you know what? I want to filter for division. I don't want to see all divisions. I just want to see east. Now watch my numbers over here. Remember this one right here, H column, that's a standard sum. I column, that's a subtotal. I'll hit OK. Ooh, look at that. My subtotal updated, $266,285. But my grand total, right, the sum, is still stuck on the complete set of records. I change it from, maybe I want east and north. Now I've got my grand total for just those two using the subtotal function, but I've still got the grand total here with the standard sum. So you got a big advantage with the subtotal feature. It's going to update based on what you're filtering for. There are different types of subtotals, not just sum, but you had average and count and min and max and a handful of other ones. A standard sum function with a list like this is static. It will always look at the complete set of records, even though you filtered it. Try these two out. Open up the exercise file, jump into list functions, do the sum first, get a total expense sum, and then do the subtotal. Remember, if you want to sum with the subtotal, what are you going to use? What's the function number? 9. And remember, you can get to help. Go into help, take a look at all the different subtotal functions that you can use.